Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you tonight about this new book of mine. It's actually published only a week ago, and to me this feels like a little like a kind of kickoff of what's going to be actually a number of talks that I'll be doing here and there. This is the first one, a chance to try out on all of you what I might hope to be doing later on as well, but I'll find out what works and what doesn't work when I talk here tonight. Let me just say that my plan for this presentation has two or three different parts. I'll start by saying just a little bit about how I got onto this project in the first place, and something too perhaps about the process of working with it over a good number of years. Then I will move to what in effect is a kind of thumbnail, well, a 15 or 20 minute maybe thumbnail of the story that lies at the heart of the book. Then I'll do a little reading from the book, a certain passage or two from the book to give you a sense of the flavor of what's in between these covers. And maybe at the very end I'll say a little bit about what drew me to the project in the first place and why I think it was worth spending quite a few years working on. It might even be worth reading a book about. How I came to the project. It was by total chance, serendipity. I have an old friend who has a house in the town of Cornwall, not too far from here. And one day in the mid-90s, this is quite a while back, my friend invited my wife and myself down for dinner. And as I recall it, we were standing around it was a summer evening, we were standing around outside with gin and tonics in our hands, I think. And one of the neighbors, who was also a dinner guest, started to tell us a little, well, what he called a piece of local history. He said, it's just a piece of local history, but you might, I'm a history guy, so maybe I would be interested. And he began to unfold this story to the tune of maybe just a few minutes, I think, but right away I was transfixed by the story. I was so intrigued, fascinated really, that as I recall, I couldn't sleep that night. I got up first thing the next morning and drove straight to Yale and went to our library there to see if anything much had been written about this, how much was known about this story beyond the locality of Cornwall. And the answer was not very much. It is mentioned, I think there are here and there are maybe a couple of books where it appears to the tune of 10 or 15 pages maybe. But the point is that there was no sort of full-scale treatment, and I decided pretty fast that I would like to make a serious commitment to it as a book project. Now, this is 20 years in time has passed. It sort of amazes me to realize this, which is to say that it was not an easy project to do. For one thing, I was leaping out of what had up to that point really been my period of history. I've made my way for many years as a colonialist, a historian of the colonial period, and this story is set in the early 19th century, so I really had to kind of feel my way into a new territory. There were also a couple of other books I wrote along the way, but I never let go of this one, and finally have gotten to the point of finishing it off. But as I say, if I hadn't gone to my friend's house that night, this book wouldn't be here, and a lot would be different. It happens that way sometimes. In fact, I've had other projects that have more or less by chance sort of come my way, but this was the most extreme case of serendipity in historical writing, at least for me. Okay, well, here's my thumbnail of the story that sort of forms the heart of the book. The background, the context in some broad sense, is a pattern, a kind of national ethos, you might say, of expansiveness in the opening years of the 19th century. The newly independent United States began around then to reach out in a major way to the rest of the world in commerce, in its political ambitions, in its go-ahead spirit, as they said at the time. And perhaps the acme, the epitome of this outreach was the China trade, a rapid growth of trade with the Far East, centering in the Chinese city of Canton. Dozens and dozens of ships heading that way and returning loaded with cargoes of tea and silks and many other China-made items on which Americans of that era placed an increasingly high premium. Well, travel to China for all these trade ships typically involved a mid-ocean stopover in the Hawaiian Islands, a chance, in short, to rest and sort of restock for the rest of the journey. And it also might lead to some reshuffling of personnel, with a few young Hawaiian men coming on board one or another of these ships as crew. And these Hawaiians might then go wherever the trade ships took them, and some might eventually land in one or another part of the United States, mostly, I think, in New England. Fast forward now to what is the first major scene, or you might say, or first act in my book. It's an autumn day in the year 1809. The setting is Yale College, where students are passing in and out on their way, I suppose, to class. I myself have seen the same kind of thing 200 years later, many, many times. Anyway, on this particular morning, there's something a little different. A young man who clearly doesn't belong there, he's dark-skinned and sort of exotic-looking, and he's wearing ragged sailor clothes, is sitting off to one side, quietly weeping. And presently, the Yale students notice him and feel concerned and ask him the reason for his apparent distress. And he replies, "Because nobody gives me learning." He's referring, of course, to the fact that all of them are getting lots of good learning, and he isn't. And this comment is sure to get their attention. He's a Hawaiian, a kind of cast-off from the China trade, in which he's worked for at least the last previous 2 years as crew. He'd been dropped off in New Haven and then found his way to the steps of Yale. His name is Obukaya. That's his Hawaiian surname. And at some point, I think while he was working alongside American sailors, he's taken a given name, Henry. Okay, Henry Obukaya was then quickly taken under the wing of a number of Yale students, responding to his initial complaint about not having learning. They began to give him language lessons, English language lessons, and at the same time to instruct him in the essentials of religious faith, the Christian faith. Yale was at that time a very religious place. I'm not sure one could say the same thing about it today. For sure a lot has changed. Well, one thing leads to another. The education and conversion of Obukaya becomes a kind of, I might almost say, a kind of campus-wide project. I'm exaggerating a bit, perhaps, but I do think his presence was widely acknowledged on campus, so much so, in fact, that he was soon taken into the household of the college president, who was a Protestant minister of great eminence named Reverend Timothy Dwight. Yale today has a residential college named Timothy Dwight, with which I have myself been long associated as a faculty fellow. Anyway, Dwight, the students, and also a fair number of outsiders who come to